Good morning.
Hi, John.
Looks like the other presenters are here.
Good morning, Ron. Good morning, John.
Morning, Ruth and Ron.
Hi, Brooke.
Good morning. I'm sorry, everybody.
I was panicking, I have to confess.
Yeah, me too.
Can
I had to drive to my parents for them to watch the kids and hit traffic, and
Ooh,
yeah, I was panicking too. Here we are, all of us.
breathe, breathe, breathe.
May I just double check a couple of pronunciations? I got McLaughlin yesterday, but Vanetta, is it Storbakken or Storbakken?
She usually says Storbakken.
Or Bakken, okay. And Janet Veras, is that a correct pronunciation?
I think she goes Jeanette.
Jeanette, okay. All right.
Ruth, your picture looks great.
Great. Okay. That history of that is, it often looks awful. Because I have so much sun shining, but today the sky's cloudy.
Ron, I think I'm not going to share put up the resource we put together.
That's fine.
If you're not going to refer to it or read from it, so you just won't worry about that.
Well, I'm gonna name it, but I'm not gonna. Yeah, that's fine.
Right. And Ruth, I saw an email from you this morning. I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to get into it. Did you answer whether you wanted me to show that list of MCUSA resources?
No, I have, well, it's on a slide, or it's in a document if you want to show it. What I sent you was 2 places in my minutes to share your screen, and one is the continuum. You suggested that I share the continuum while I'm talking about the continuum, so I sent you a document of that. The
Okay.
PDF I couldn't get to turn properly. The slide I could, but the slide is a screenshot, so that would be whatever you deem better. I think it's a great idea to have that up while I'm talking about it.
All right, so I'm going to download the continuum. Oh, there's 2.
Yeah, the PDF, I couldn't get it to rotate 90 degrees, so it's up and down instead of horizontal. And I couldn't get it to save reoriented. But you probably can just do that on your screen and share it that way on your screen.
Yeah, I should be able to.
And can I ask another couple of questions real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, right there, sorry, Ron, right there it is. Shall I just share it on mine?
You, totally
No,
up to you.
no, because then I can't see my page.
Right, yeah, I can do
Okay.
it if that's simpler for you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, that would be much simpler.
Yep.
And I am reading the list, so it's up to you whether you want to include that or not.
Okay, so I have the intercultural development continuum. Oh, it looks like it's the same. Oh, is it the same? Is the graphic the same? You sent me 2
Yeah.
versions of it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I will share the PDF. It's a little cleaner.
Yeah, it looks much better.
Just logistically here,
Yeah.
when I'm done with my thing, I'm going to say, Ruth, that you're up next to talk about the IDI and resources from MCSA. And then Amy and John, I'm assuming that you're just going to follow one after the other without any more introduction. So if you want to introduce yourselves again at the beginning of yours, that would be great. And then the other thing is the Q&A. Are you going to be passing questions on to us, Brooke?
Yes, I will be.
All right. So I'm assuming that any of us can answer or respond to questions that are coming from Brooke.
Yeah, yeah. If I feel like there's one that's specifically for any one of you, then I will, yeah, direct those to you.
Okay.
I'll probably miss them. I have trouble paying attention to chat, but I'll try.
Yeah, no, I mean, you don't have to try. Yeah,
Oh.
don't feel obligated.
Oh, you mean when they come in? Okay. Amy, at the end of my little spiel, I'm going to say over to you, Amy. That
I'll
way
do
you
the
know
same
I'm-
for you, John.
And Ruth, I'm going to share. And is this all you're looking for the list?
Yes.
So I'll just put this up,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one, with the other one being,
I'm going to be reading that from in my own portion, and it would be nice to have it up, but it doesn't have to be. That's very near the beginning. It's like after my first sentence, because I'm starting with that.
right. And getting, oh, you're all watching me do the getting Ruth's graphic up. John, you feeling good about this? You need anything?
Sorry, what did you say?
You feel good about this? You need anything?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So when John is done, I'll just go ahead and transition this into the Q&A time.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming we're aiming to end at 11. So
Right.
close to that as possible.
Right.
Great.
And Ruth, there's your other one.
Yep.
So you'll let me know when you want that up.
You can put it up almost as soon as I start talking. I think I have two
Okay.
sentences before that.
I'll do that, and I'll take it down soon after.
Yeah, and then when I start talking about the continuum itself, you can put that one
Right.
up. Thank
Right,
you.
right, right. Okay, I'm going to bring up my script. I'm going to stop sharing. And I think we're ready. Yeah.
Let me just get my script up first. Okay, yep.
All right, here we go. Good morning, everybody. We're gonna wait a few minutes. Looks like we are getting lots of people in our, letting people into the webinar here. So we'll just wait another minute. All right, we've got 53 people here with us this morning. Welcome, welcome. My name is Brooke Musselman. I'm the conference coordinator for Atlantic Coast Conference. We are thrilled to have such an awesome response to this webinar. Yeah, we might be getting up to 70 participants, and this will also be available, the recorded version, through the ACC website, and I'll post it to Facebook as well. So feel free to head over or to check that out and share it with others as that comes through. A few introductory comments on Zoom before we get into today's content. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat button. I'd invite each of you here as we begin to go ahead and send a message to the whole group with your name, what faith community you represent, and maybe what that community is currently doing or planning to work at anti-racism. Also at the bottom of the screen is a Q&A button. This is where you can type your questions or comments that you'd like to share with the panelists this morning. We will do our best to answer a few of these throughout the webinar, and I'll also be sharing some with the panelists during our Q&A session towards the end of this hour. To introduce our panelists, we have Ron Adams. He's the lead pastor at Landisville, previously at East Chestnut Street as the pastor. He's also the chair of the Peace and Justice Committee and is the chair of our anti-racism task group for ACC. Ron got involved in peace work after being part of a Witness for Peace delegation to Nicaragua in 1984 during the Contra War. Since then, he's been involved in local organizing and activities related to peacemaking and racial justice. Amy Yoder McLaughlin is a pastor at Fraser Mennonite Church. She also leads delegates to Palestine every summer with Christian Peacemaker teams and serves on the Christian Peacemaker team's steering committee representing Mennonite Church USA. Ruth Yoder Wenger is a pastor at Bronx Mennonite Church, and she's the ACC conference minister for our congregations in New York City. She's been working closely with the team that is forming Brooklyn Peace Center and Brooklyn Peace Church, and has lived and done ministry in the Bronx for over 25 years. John has taught peace education globally for Mindanao Peacebuilding Institute for 19 years and has done other peace work for MCC and others for over 20 years. So these are our panelists. Thanks to you four for agreeing to share from the wisdom you found on your own journey. And now I'll turn it over to Ron Adams to share with us.
Thanks, Brooke. Good morning. My name is Ron Adams, and I'm one of the pastors of Landisville Mennonite Church. And as Brooke said, I'm currently the chair of the ACC Peace and Justice Committee and also of the recently formed Anti-Racism Task Group. The purpose of our time this morning is to introduce ourselves and our work. It's also to offer you a glimpse into a few of the resources listed in a booklet that we've prepared for you and your congregations. And we'll use whatever time we have left for question and answer time with you all. Please note, though, that if we run out of time this morning to get to your question, or if your question occurs to you after we're already done, please feel free to be in touch with me or any member of the task group. If we have an answer, we will do our best to respond quickly and clearly. And if we don't have an answer, we will do our best to let you know that and direct you to someone who maybe does have that answer. ACC's Anti-Racism Task Group was formed by the executive committee of our conference. The other members of the task group are Ruth Douglas Miller of Conestoga Mennonite Church, John Williamson from Pilgrims Mennonite Church, and then Amy, Ruth, Brooke, and I. Our calling as a task group is to collect, highlight, and develop resources and learning opportunities around racism and its many effects for conference congregations and their members. And our hope is to point to some ways for people to advance in their journey toward deeper racial understanding and to foster a desire to participate in justice-based change in our own hearts and in our congregations and in society as a whole. From the beginning, our team has held the belief that dismantling racism is the work of the white community. And so our task group is intentionally comprised of white individuals from around the conference. However, we've also agreed that in many ways we must follow the lead of people of color by listening to their requests and gaining their feedback as we approach these topics. As a result, we've tested our ideas and resources with an intercultural relations reference committee consisting of 6 people of color from our congregations and beyond. And their feedback is an important part of this project and has helped develop ideas for additional resources for the future. Members of the Intercultural Relations Reference Committee are Ken Thompson, pastor at Friendship Community Church, Bonetta Storbakken, Manhattan Mennonite Church, Andrew Bowden, is a member of Forest Hills Mennonite Church, Jeanette Veras from Laurel Street Mennonite Church, Taymon Cook from Lancaster Theological Seminary, and Rashard Allen from Nessville Mennonite Church. We are extremely grateful for their partnership and for their willingness to hold us accountable as we seek to fulfill our calling as a task group. Racism has traditionally been understood as one's personal judgment and prejudice toward others based on skin color. It's often associated with hateful speech and actions, and it is a label to be quickly denied and defended against. But more helpful to the conversation that we're having this morning, and that we hope to see replicated in your congregations, is a definition of racism as systemic, prejudice put into action by individuals and the collective institutions and policies of our society that discriminate based on the color of one's skin, whether intentionally set up to do that or not. Systemic racism provides power and privilege for white folks and serves to keep that power and privilege in place. And systemic racism serves to keep people of color from accessing that power and privilege. In short, systemic racism is a form of oppression that privileges white people over people of color. Individuals can hold an implicit bias or an attitude or stereotype that affects our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Bias is baked into our society and learned through our daily interactions. As white people, we can be oblivious to that bias. It's one of the privileges of whiteness, but it also prevents us from working to end racism and to create a more just, equitable society. Our work, we believe, is to be aware of and overcome these learned biases through the work of anti-racism, proactive and deliberate efforts as individuals and collectives to oppose and dismantle prejudice in its individual, institutional, systemic, and cultural forms. As I noted earlier, our work as a task group is to seek out and share resources for individuals and congregations. Since forming as a task group, we've been compiling a collection of resources for use by individuals, small groups, and congregations. Thanks to the good work of Brooke Musselman, those resources are now in booklet form, and that booklet will be made available to those who've registered for this webinar today and will be shared with all the congregations within the Atlantic Coast Conference in the coming weeks. It contains a variety of options for increasing awareness of the realities of racism and its consequences, and to assist us as individuals and congregations to become actively anti-racist. More specifically, we've compiled resources that we believe will be especially useful to white folks like us. It's our hope that by engaging with these resources, we white folks will become more deeply aware of our complicity in racism, how we've benefited from a political and economic arrangement that oppresses people of color, and how we might begin working against the privilege that comes merely by virtue of being born and identified as white. Now, we know that many of the resources we are recommending may make us uncomfortable. We know this because we've been made uncomfortable ourselves. And they may challenge some of our cherished notions and in other ways make for a difficult journey. For this reason, we recommend that congregations consider forming an anti-racism task group, a small group of people who can offer support, promote ongoing learning, and provide some structure to your work. Individuals might consider forming a small group for discussing and processing what you're working on and learning. You may choose to do this with an already existing Sunday school class or small group. And your congregation may want to consider partnering with another congregation to focus together on a particular resource. This is a journey that benefits greatly from being shared with others. We encourage you to invite others along for mutual support and encouragement on the journey. Speaking for myself, I believe that taking up the work of becoming anti-racist is one of the central discipleship responsibilities of our time. I believe it to be holy work, and I hope that together we in ACC can bear witness to the transforming, healing, hopeful work of God in Christ Jesus. One last word, and that is this: those of us in the ACC Anti-Racism Task Group do not consider ourselves to be experts. We have not arrived. We too are on the journey, and we too are finding our way. That being said, we're willing to respond to questions, receive recommendations for resources to explore, and offer whatever support we can as members and congregations walk together. We don't presume to know what you and your congregations are already doing to work at becoming anti-racist, and we would love to hear from you about that work. So please let us know. how the Holy Spirit is leading your community of faith in the work of dismantling racism and becoming anti-racist. At this time, I'll invite Ruth Yoder Wenger to share with us about the Intercultural Development Inventory and some resources from Mennonite Church USA. Ruth?
Thanks, Ron. Hello, everyone. 2 tweaks on Brooke's introduction. My congregation is North Bronx Mennonite Church, and I've actually lived in the city for almost 50 years. It's been home for a long, long time. So first of all, MCUSA's website has a deep and rich collection of resources for groups and individuals desiring to dismantle racism. If you haven't had a chance to explore these links, we recommend them as essential for anti-racism work in our congregations. The list is here, and it's also available in our resource booklet. Each of these is a different web page with multiple web pages hidden underneath. Anti-racism resources for Mennonite churches, anti-racism resources for white allies, and this is where the Intercultural Development Inventory appears. Anti-racism basics, anti-racism resources for BIPOC, that's Black, Indigenous, People of Color, Race, Church, and Change webinar and resource list, and an anti-racism glossary. Again, you can find that link in the resource list that will be coming out. The ACC Anti-Racism Task Group and the Executive Committee are working with the IDI to better equip ourselves as leaders. So now more about the IDI. Many of us here have heard the call to do anti-racism work. Some of us are deeply motivated to do it. Some are already well-equipped and inspired and competent in the skills required to do it effectively. However, many of us who feel deeply motivated haven't yet had the experiences, the exposure, the learning opportunities that equip us for truly effective anti-racism work. Becoming more interculturally competent, more interculturally adept, goes hand in hand with developing capacities and skills and strategies for specific anti-racism work. Differences in culture, most simply described as how we do things here, can get in our way if we don't understand deeply our own culture and the cultures of others. What we wear, what we eat, how we talk, who we honor, what we celebrate. These differences we can observe across cultures. Deeper differences, how we think, what we value, what we believe, what matters to us, why we believe what we believe, are not as observable and not as easy to bridge. The IDI was designed to help organizations and groups benefit from diversity rather than ignore or deny or reject its value in accomplishing their goals and most creatively and effectively. It helps organizations and groups look at how their systemic culture may be inadvertently stymieing diversity rather than maximizing diversity as an asset. The intercultural development continuum represents a pathway of growth toward intercultural competence, describing different mindsets that develop according to our exposure, our experiences, our reflective learning. A monocultural mindset regarding differences doesn't really recognize that there truly are culturally significant differences and may be uncomfortable encountering some. What racial problem, you might say? I don't get it. This has nothing to do with me. Or we may come to recognize differences and decide that our way is better than their way. Those people are a threat to our way of life. Or we may decide that their way is better than our way. I am so ashamed of my culture. With a more transitional mindset or orientation along the continuum, we come to recognize differences, but we may tend to minimize them. We might say, all lives matter, or I don't see skin color, or we should all just try to get along. We may also tend to universalize some of our own particular perspectives. We might say, If only we could see that we're all children of God, even if we don't know it. Deeper understanding can lead to an intercultural orientation or mindset in which we recognize and appreciate significant differences in values and behaviors, and we're eager to learn more. In this phase, we may accept differences, but not know how to bridge them without compromising our own values and ethics. We might say, I want to understand better how racism impacts people and our work and do something about it. Eventually, with practice and reflection, we can learn to adapt across cultures with empathy and flexibility while maintaining our own moral and ethical commitments. We might say, I can see how all systems are exquisitely designed to get the results they are getting. I want to work to dismantle racism. As learners, we connect best with prompts and invitations that recognize and take into account where we are now. So when we set out goals for becoming more interculturally competent in dismantling racism, we can learn best if we start from where we are, which is really our only option anyway. And it's most helpful if we at least have a sense of where we are right now. The IDI is designed for groups of 3 to several hundred people to see where they are. As an individual member of a group, you complete an online inventory which poses 50 statements with which you agree or disagree. All the individual scores make up your group's composite score. A group profile is generated to help establish reasonable goals and set up learning opportunities tailored for your group's current stage or stages of development on the continuum. If, for example, your group's individual scores range across the entire intercultural development continuum, a wide range of learning opportunities will be most helpful. Both group and individual scores are provided through debriefs by a trained, qualified administrator, usually 1 to 3 hours for a group, recommended is 2 hours, and 45 minutes for an individual. A personally tailored plan is provided in an individual debrief. In MCUSA, there are about 20 qualified administrators. I'm one. See the brochure on MCUSA's website for contact information. Taking the online inventory costs $21 per person. MCUSA's suggested fee for debriefs is $75 an hour, but QAs, that is qualified administrators, can negotiate their own fees. If you think this approach may be helpful for your group, check out the QAs on the list and contact someone directly, or contact Sue Park Herr or Sarah Chase at MennoniteUSA.org. As Mennonite followers of Jesus, we desire to break down the barriers that divide us by race. We desire to build bridges across those divides. We can build those bridges better if we are better equipped. The IDI can help us understand better where we're starting from and how we can best move forward with our commitment to anti-racism work. Paul encouraged the Philippian church to, quote, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who gave up divine power, prestige, and position to help us, his disciples, learn how to love our neighbors. May we become better at it. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm Amy Yoder McLaughlin from Fraser Mennonite Church in the western suburbs of Philadelphia. Before being here, I lived and worked in Philadelphia for about 22 years. So coming here as a pastor, I wasn't quite sure where my congregation was in conversations about race. In Philly, it's in the congregation where I served, it was pretty much part of our everyday conversations in vernacular. So wasn't quite sure here. Strangely enough, this pandemic has created an incredible opportunity. Folks are home more, they're reading more, they're doing more soul searching at home. And so when George Floyd was murdered by police officers in Minneapolis in June, it created an opening for these conversations about race in this country. So I wasn't sure where my congregation was. I felt very unsteady on my feet about entering into these conversations until folks started coming to me to talk to me about race. I would hear folks say things like, I think I'm a racist, or I think I'm part of the problem. And that's where I saw opportunities. Folks were open, they were ready, they were shocked by what they were seeing on the news and all around the world as a result of George Floyd's death. So I proposed to the congregation conversations around race in small cohorts of about 12 to 15 people for an entire year. So twice a month for a year. That's a big ask of people. But hey, we're all stuck at home. We all get our social interaction from Zoom. And so folks were ready and game to have these conversations. So Fraser has about 45 people in 3 separate cohorts that meet twice a month. And we are meeting and having conversations that come out of reading White Fragility together. I see these conversations as being directly connected to our faith. So racism is a systemic sin. We are bound up in it. And our work as people of faith is to confess and be transformed. And so these conversations about race are really integral to that. So we're meeting twice a month on Zoom. These are the group assumptions that we have in our gatherings. That this is a priority in our schedule. Things happen, we can't always be at every event, but we really want to make this a real priority. We're taking a confessional approach to addressing racism. We understand as a baseline that we are part of a racist system, that our hearts, our practices, and our lived experiences have been infected by racist mentalities. And we also know that we did not create racism, we were born into it, but that's no excuse. We have a responsibility to be part of undoing racism. This year is a time for us to work on our own perspectives, biases, and worldviews. This year is about decentering our own perspectives and hearing from people of color. Other group assumptions are that we are keeping an open mind and heart, that we are going to try not to be afraid to take risks, but we will also recognize that we will screw up, that we will be uncomfortable, and that this is really hard work. So we've started our cohorts by reading together a chapter at a time, Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. So every week, a few days before we gather, I send out a list of questions. Folks have an opportunity to answer one question. So everyone in the group will choose the question they want to answer. Let's say we have 4 people that want to answer question 1. They all answer, and then the rest of the group has an opportunity to ask curious questions of each other and to hold each other accountable as we read these questions together. So we go through those questions. I started out by using a study guide that was online for the book and realized that it was working on our intellect and not on our heart. So I've tried to change the questions to make them about our experience and what we see in the world and in our communities as a way to work on our own personal transformation. Mennonites really like to fix things and go out there and do things. But one of the blessings, if I can even say that, of this pandemic is that we are really limited in how we can do that. And our work this year in particular is about looking within our own selves and recognizing the white supremacy and those attitudes that live in us, and working to transform those before we rush out and try to fix things. So that's what we're doing at Fraser. I'm going to send it over to you now, John.
Thanks, Amy. John Rudy from Landisville Mennonite. And I think Amy has kind of set the stage for a lot of the energies, convergent energies in congregations as to why now that we're focusing, as many of us as whites, after George Floyd's killing in this pandemic, Mary Lou Adams came forward, had a real pressing burden to do something. And so she and I teamed up with to offer a set of initial classes on anti-racism. And I'm going to share my screen here. What we came up with was a much shorter program, one that didn't require as much commitment as Amy's groups have. But the purpose then was to start the conversation and understand that this was a starting point to get people into a much deeper conversation. So in July, Mary Lou and I facilitated 3 sessions, or I should say our first session was July and then into August. And so we had 2 rounds of this. We were going to limit the number of people. We didn't want them to be too large. We wanted it to be an intimate space. We were going to focus 1.5 hours for 3 sessions. And the first session was about the present. And so we spent a lot of time introducing ourselves. And I like this idea of getting into the heart rather than the cerebral, which is ironic because my PowerPoint is very cerebral here. But why are we here? What is going on in our lives that compels us into a group like this to explore this topic now? And then we attached it to faith. What are our faith motivations? We had some time for terms and definitions, and it's interesting to have explored some of these terms. I think Ron laid out a number of those: emotional labor, white fragility, privilege, microaggressions. Then the second session, we looked at history, and in between time, we told participants that they were going to have to do some homework, both reading, paying attention, and also thinking about their own histories. And so the second session, we used this ladder of anti-racism awareness and activism coming from dismantling racism. And then we crowdsourced the timeline. We kind of drew a timeline. We're doing this all on Zoom. And so using some of the graphic potentials of Zoom, we kind of crowdsourced, what do we all know about the history of racism? And then finally, the third session was looking into the future and saying, well, so what now? What do we do? We looked at that through the lenses of reparations, and micro reparations, personal reparations, as well as structural. But then we asked that very personal question. So what are you going to do, both personally and within your spheres of influence? How will you continue to educate yourself? The two different classes was totaling 18 participants, and that email chain continues, I think, to be important, both of sharing resources, of meeting the need to stay connected and continue the conversation. We understood as whites that this is only the beginning, and that Eventually, relationships will have to be formed with persons of color to, like, this isn't just work that's done in isolation, but it has to be connected to larger larger sets of relationships to work at both personal and structural facets of this. I asked Mary Lou what she would like to have said in this panel. She couldn't make it here today. She said, and this is a quote from her, "I think it is really important to me to know that I'm not out there by myself, that there are people in my congregation who share my concerns, worries, griefs, and are willing to do something and talk about it." So that's our experience here. And if any of you are interested, Mary Lou and I can both kind of talk you through if you would like to do that in your own congregations or something similar. So that's mine. Ron, back to you.
Well, thanks to the three of you for sharing this morning. That was my rather awkward attempt to transition us into a question and answer time. We have about sort of close to a little over 20 minutes. If you have questions, use the Q&A link down at the bottom of your screen, and then Brooke will pass things along to us. And as I said at the beginning, we'll do our best to answer them if we can. And if we can't, we'll do our best to see if we can find somebody who can answer. So what are you thinking? What are your questions?
One question that came in beforehand that may have been answered, and any of the four of you can either reiterate something you said or add something new. The question that came in was, how can a predominantly white Mennonite congregation move toward becoming an ally with people of color, churches of color, and communities of color who have experienced the oppressive effects of racism for decades and centuries? Should I read that again? How can a predominantly white Mennonite congregation move toward becoming an ally with people of color, churches of color, and communities of color who have experienced the oppressive effects of racism for decades and centuries?
Can I jump in here? I think one of the ways is to pay attention what's going on locally. For us, Landisville, not that far from Lancaster, there was a tremendous amount of protesting going on in Lancaster. And that's an opportunity both to engage either on the street or there was a group called Green Dreams who was soliciting funding, and Carolyn and I actually made contact with them. We gave them a few bucks to, and that was actually the opening to a relationship. And it's a tenuous relationship, and yet it's a way to connect with what's going on, the concerns on the street, and the concerns. This is a very young group, and just to hear from them and begin to build some of those bridges. I think that they'll never come to Landisville as congregants, but I don't think this is about growing churches or anything. This is about justice and how we see justice and are in relationship.
I'm going to say something somewhat counter to what John said, and say that I've cautioned my congregation not to jump into developing those relationships until we've done some of our own internal work, because what I've seen happen is that white congregations can do a lot of damage in their enthusiasm to go out and fix some things. So I've really encouraged folks to just settle into their discomfort and do that internal work and see where the Spirit leads.
And I think that's the intention of the booklet, the materials that we put together, is to provide resources for congregations and individuals to do some of that internal, personal work, learning, developing awareness as a prelude to more direct involvement.
And one challenge for us as white people is that we don't know what we don't know. And so we think we're well equipped. We've had lots of experience in different places. So we're ready to do this. We know how it works. And yet there are attitudes, our own deep intercultural values that we don't recognize because we're in them. And we can learn as we move through these various materials, what we know, what we don't know that we know, and we know that we don't know. And that's part of the challenge. When we find out what we don't know, it's like, what? Are you kidding me? So, yeah.
I'll add to what Ruth said and just give a plug for the IDI. Our task group did this IDI, and I'll be honest, it was disheartening at first to see myself and see all the things that I thought I knew that I actually don't know. But at the same time, my personality is to be like, okay, challenge accepted. And I'm really focused on trying to move my knowledge and my experience more deeply.
May I ask a follow-up question real quick? Is that allowed, Brooke?
We'll allow it.
Thank you. My question is kind of connecting what John said to what the rest of us have said, and that is, if there are protests, if there are vigils, rallies, Black Lives Matter actions, and so forth going on in our communities, is that an appropriate way for us as white folks to listen and learn? You know what I mean? That feels different to me than kind of trying to leap into the middle and do some fixing.
Well, and I think Amy's caution is an important one here. We have to take our cues and our leadership from those folks who are doing the organizing, and until we're ready to do that, then there should be some, our own work is being done. So yeah.
When I have gone to marches, I bring my daughter with me, and I've encouraged her to follow the lead of the people of color in the crowd, to pay attention to what we're being asked to chant as white folks and what we're not being asked to say, and to do more listening. And so those are the practices that we try to bring with us when we go to those marches, and also to wear a mask.
And also coming back to what we know and what we don't know, when we are in a march or when we're observing chaos around us, or where we're observing lack of action, we can also say, what's going on here that I can't see? What don't I know that I don't know?
Moving on to another question for Ruth, mainly. Ruth, can you share a bit more about the MCUSA anti-racism course, and also how you would recommend congregations or leadership teams use this in conjunction with the IDI?
Maybe someone on the panel has worked through this. I haven't. The course that was developed by Tobin Miller Shearer. It's first, I'll just say at the beginning that that's highly recommended, especially for leaders and other people who have responsibility in Mennonite churches, but it's not recommended unless you have located yourself, your group, on the IDI. That's a specific recommendation, because it's not, it starts at a level where people recognize racism as systemic, more significantly than interpersonal. And if you and the people you're working with don't recognize that, there can be pushback from that. And that's one of the values of doing the IDI, because it can give an indication of whether or not a particular resource will be useful for you in this current stage of development. Someone else can help out better with this, perhaps. I think it's a series of 5 or 8 online webinars with Tobin around racism, and it uses the same analysis as what was Damascus Road is now called Roots of Justice. So it does similar education and reflection as that training program. The training program, by the way, Roots of Justice, is now available online also.
Mhm. I think that MCUSA training, it's 8 hours of individual modules. Yeah, I forget how many. And it's available to congregations on a sliding scale. So your congregation can purchase the license, and any number of people from the congregation can go through that on their own. I think the cost begins at $250 and goes up from there. But we'll be sending more information about that as well. And Ruth, can you say again, what was the cost for the IDI?
For individuals doing the online inventory, it's $21. And then for a group debrief and an individual debrief, it's $75 an hour. You can't take it online by just going in and doing an assessment. You can't see your score or your group score without the debrief, because there has to be a lot of context around that to help make it a useful tool. But a group as small as 3 could take it. It can be hundreds of people taking it. Mennonite Church USA has a person, an administrative person assigned to set this up. And I can point you to how that can be done through MCUSA. So a group doesn't have to do all of the logistics for signing up for the IDI, as long as we have email addresses and names. So it might be particularly a leadership group in a congregation, like the council or like the board, because they're going to be responsible perhaps for what's happening, or an anti-racism group could take it. It's for groups, not for individuals, although you will have an individual score, which you may see if you choose to do the debrief. That's the only way you can see it. And someone asked in chat if there are scholarships. No, QAs can negotiate our fees. So I might say, well, because I'm a staff person, I'll do it for less for my staff, etc. I suppose they could also go up if we wanted to, but I don't think that's probably happening.
Thanks, Ruth. Could any of the 4 of you talk a little bit more about how you've navigated any disagreement within your congregation, maybe between those who really want to work at racism and those who think conversation around this area is either unnecessary or even problematic? Maybe you've not experienced that at all.
Well, I'll just start real quickly and say that because the bulk of the conversations that we've had so far at Landisville, at least in the last year, have happened since COVID, with some of the same sort of side blessings that COVID brought us by giving us opportunity for these kinds of conversations. They're happening on Zoom, which means folks are kind of self-selecting or opting in that are interested. That just to say that I don't know that I have an answer for you. I can say that there has been a significant response in the congregation. People who are entering into these conversations are doing so with energy and I think a desire to learn and grow. So that's kind of a snapshot of where Landisville's at. John, if you have more you want to say about what's going on here, go for it.
I agree. I mean, I think the ability to self-select in a group like this begins with to build a kind of a core of people who, and you know, in my theory of change, it will expand out into the congregation, particularly since leadership at Landisville has been very supportive. I think that's also key of taking a hard look at the issues of racism.
At Fraser, this is an opt-in model as well, so I haven't had any pushback. There's been a sense of like discomfort within the groups about what we're doing, and I keep reminding folks that as white people, we have a low level of tolerance for discomfort, and that these groups are to expand our tolerance for that. So when people are like, "Ugh, really don't like this chapter," or "I don't like what she's saying," or they argue, I recognize that it's because a mirror is being held up to us, and we don't like what we see. So that's how I'm interpreting discomfort or pushback within the groups.
My congregation, which is almost entirely non-white, does not have much of a range across the continuum. We're united in our concerns and heartbreak around what we see happening around us.
Brooke, you're muted.
Thank you. Two questions here that are similar. Has ACC thought of making a public confession? And also, what is being done in Mennonite Church USA or ACC regarding our own contribution to racism in our historic relationships with the Black community? When I was a kid, I think we prided ourselves on doing the Fresh Air program, but I think that was often done with a sense of superiority. So as far as from an MCUSA or at the ACC level, any kind of confession or concrete action taking place that you're aware of or want to share?
One comment that Sue Parker made in a webinar was that from her standpoint, and she's BIPOC, now is not so much the time for white people to lament and do that kind of thing as to figure out what we're doing that keeps creating the need to lament. What don't we know that we don't know? I remember that when the MCUSA convention was in San Diego, I believe it was, years and years ago, there was a public confession of some harm done that went awry because it had been done from a standpoint that didn't recognize what we don't know. And so it's not something that is on the front burner. We need to do this and that will help fix things. It's more, let's figure out where we are, what we need to change. Let's transform ourselves within the system, not just our hearts, but transform our system. And in that process, we'll learn what it is we need to confess. So Amy, your term was being confessional. It's not about going to someone else and saying, we're sorry. It's about working within ourselves and saying, oh God.
Another question. For those especially those congregations who are more rural, question, how particularly to address the segregation of society. Many of us do not know people of color anywhere nearby, beyond our single refugee family. No action, no groups operating nearby. Beyond educating ourselves and doing internal work, is there any action you'd recommend from congregations who wouldn't work with this systemic aspect?
Well, I think Landisville might be the most rural of the congregations represented on the panel here. I guess I'm going to stick to what we've been saying so far, and I know it's frustrating because I know I'm a voluntary Mennonite. I became a Mennonite as an adult, and one of the things I've learned about my Mennonite communities is that they like to get their hands on stuff and make things better. And that's a virtue. That's a gift. However, in this case, I think it can make us frustrated when we hear people like us say, we need to do the work. We need to learn. We need to be educated. We need to you know, that's maybe that for now is what we can do, all we can do. And that can be done regardless, I think this is fair to say, regardless of the location of your congregation. So I don't know if anybody else wants to either correct what I've just said or add to it. But that's kind of speaking as a person who's been part of this task group. I think that resonates at least very much with me. This is our responsibility and we can do this. And it needs to be done first.
An additional way of working at it is to give money to support organizations that are doing the work while we can't do it. We're not on site to do it, but sending money is a helpful thing to do. It's more fun to do quilts. It's more fun to do other fundraising things, but money is always helpful. And exposing ourselves to as much as we can among, for instance, the resources in this booklet, exposing ourselves, doing reflective learning about it. What does this mean to me? What don't I know that I don't know? That can shift our minds, and in that way we become part of the spiritual shift, the spiritual transformation that goes on across the whole church, even though we're not physically close by.
Mm-hmm. Ruth, another quick IDI question. Would you say it is not recommended for an entire congregation to take the IDI, only leadership, or would it be great for a congregation?
No, a whole congregation can do it too. If you have a congregation of 100 people, that's pretty costly to have individual debriefs, but it's certainly doable. And if someone wants to go there, certainly. Another possibility is that you can, if you just do the group debrief, you can get a good sense of how widespread across the continuum your folks are, because that's one of the charts that gets generated with the group debrief. So you can see that you have, out of 100 people, you have maybe 10 people who are in the very beginning stages, who haven't been exposed much or have been exposed differently. And then you have, usually it'll be about 80% in the middle of that continuum. And you may have a few people on the adaptation phase of the continuum. That's usually not more than 5%. And then it's a bell curve. But it's useful to know that when you're planning what you might want to do with a whole congregation, because you won't use the same activities for the folks who are in monocultural mindset. They're not ready for it. It's like asking a baby to walk. It's not about being a baby or a child, but you can't expand your thinking at a high level until you've done it at a middle level, sort of. So it becomes transformational, and you choose then across that congregation entree points that make sense for people across that range. It's also useful to helping to understand what might be happening in your congregation and why certain people are where they are. Across Mennonite Church USA, all agencies and congregations that have done the IDI have come out on the bell curve. It's about 80%. Even people who've been abroad doing mission work fall into that middle transitional mindset where people want to get along with each other and emphasize how much we are alike. The next phase of that is understanding what differences matter and how they do matter, and then learning how to bridge them. So Mennonites are mostly in that middle phase.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, we are running up right up against our time. Thanks to the four of you for sharing from your own experiences and your where you are on the journey. And thanks to all of you who joined us this morning. I will be sending many of these resources. I'll be sending contact information for the five of us, me with the ACC office. I'll be sending the resource that our committee has developed to help with help your congregation with kind of the short-term aspect of moving towards being anti-racist. I'm going to ask for John Rudy's slide to share. I'm going to be sending Ruth's resources. So you'll get all of that by email if you had let me know you registered. If you have not registered, office at atlanticcoastconference.net is how you can be in touch with me to request any of these resources. So thanks to all of you for being with us today, and have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you.